Now, we're going to bring you some highlights from an important program that was held just a few days ago at Revolution Books in Harlem, New York City, to mark the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, between Sansara Taylor, the co-host of this, the Revolution Nothing Less show, and a co-initiator of Rise Up for Abortion Rights, and Fran Luck, a longtime radical feminist and the host of Joy of Resistance Multicultural Feminist Radio on WBAI in New York City, hosted by Raymond Latta at Revolution Books. Sansara Taylor presented first and brought alive the reality that denying the right to abortion and forcing women to have children against their will is female enslavement.
But let's go further. Have you asked yourself why? Why do we live in a society where Dark Ages theocrats, several of them appointed by a white supremacist fascist thug who openly bragged about sexually assaulting women, why does this Dark Ages Supreme Court get to sit and dictate the lives of women and girls? Why is it that everywhere around the globe, women are beaten and raped, stalked and degraded, turned into sexual objects and pimped out, or shrouded and punished if they have sex at all? And why has it been this way for thousands of years? And have you ever let yourself dream, I mean really dream, of a world where women could walk the earth free of fear of harassment, brutality, free of fear of rape, or any form of shame or control over them and their bodies and their reproduction? Have you let yourself dream of a society and a world where all forms of oppression that women face, and all other forms of oppression against Black people and immigrants, against LGBTQ people and others, all forms of oppression are uprooted and overcome?
She also exposed the roots of this attack on women in the nature and dynamics of this system we live under, capitalism, imperialism, and urged people to lift their sights and unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for a real revolution, and unite everyone who can be united to beat back this fascist assault on women now. To get deeper into this, watch Sansara's segment on episode 131 of The RNL Show titled, Make Roe's Reversal a Rallying Cry for Revolution. Now, let's go to an excerpt from Fran Luck's presentation, where she brings alive important history and perspective and a taste of the radical struggle that went into winning abortion rights in the first place. One of the things she talks about was consciousness-raising groups that women organized as a part of the women's liberation struggle of the late 1960s and early 70s. This was one important stream of a whole mix of radical upsurge and other changes that were taking place at a time which fed into the 1973 Supreme Court decision to legalize abortion nationwide in Roe v. Wade.
Okay, so here we are, and Roe versus Wade has been overturned. This demon, this horrible thing that was on the horizon for so long, and it has happened. It was, of course, predictable, and yet it's still a shock. And Scalise, who was the highest-ranking person at the Right to Life March, that's, of course, in giant quotes, that Right to Life phrase, said, this is just the beginning. You know, we're just going to go on. And they're already giving all these signals. They're going after medication abortion, which is important. And they want to get rid of any way any woman could possibly sneak around all these bans. They are threatening to put doctors in prison. They are threatening to put women in prison. They're really on the march. They're going after contraception. They're going after in vitro fertilization. I mean, you name it. They're going after free speech because they aiding and abetting abortion also includes speaking about abortion, right? So that's what they would like. The question is, what would we like? That's really the issue. We know what they're going to do. What are we going to do? What are we going to demand? I think this is a question that has to be looked at with specificity. What you demand has a lot to do with what you wind up getting, which history has really shown. So I'm going to talk about two things. One is, how did we get Roe v. Wade in the first place, which isn't much talked about. It's kind of shrouded in that misty place that women's history somehow disappears into. And it really needs to be taken out of that foggy place. And the other question is to actually look at Roe. Now, this is a disaster. I'm not in the least underplaying that. However, it's important to understand that Roe itself was a compromise, an enormous compromise with the radical women who were demanding something much more radical at the time that the abortion movement was taking off. And that very much more radical thing was repeal of all abortion laws. Cindy Sisler, who was one of the leaders of that movement, said, when you're looking for a repeal, when she was trying to say what repeal would look like, she would hold up a blank sheet of paper. Nothing on it. Okay. In other words, it shouldn't be singled out as any special kind of medical procedure. Okay. It's just another one, because every time it's singled out, an overlay of so-called morality is put on it. That is why it is singled out. That is what happens to it. The morality police kind of come in and limit it in every kind of way. So it should just be a medical procedure. Of course, it should be done under sanitary conditions as any other medical procedure would be, period. Women started talking to each other. And one of the things they talked about was abortion. And the women who were speaking about abortion had usually never spoken about it before, because you never spoke about that. It was, as they say, hidden in fear and shame. So they started talking about it, and out of that feeling that, hey, I'm not alone in this, all the other women are feeling this way too, came actions. So this first action was the disruption of this hearing. And the hearing was in 1969. It was 14 men and a nun who were going to decide the fate of women. So they got up in the middle of the hearing, and Kathy Fairchild, I think they drew lots to see who would do it. She led off and she yelled, "We are the experts. Let the women speak. We are the real experts." Well, they kicked them out of the meeting, but there were television crews there. So the women went into the hall and they conducted a speak out where they talked about their abortions, then illegal. This was filmed. It got on TV. The next day, most of the newspapers in New York City had headlines that said things like, "Gals squeal for repeal." Okay, that was classic New York Post kind of headline. But, it got in the papers, right? This was the beginning. From there, they decided to do their own speak out, and they held one at Washington Square Methodist Church, and 12 women got up and talked about their then illegal abortions, risking arrest, risking being fired from their jobs, etc. And then speak outs started to spread, just as consciousness raising had spread. It's about 1969.
Lastly, we want to show you a few highlights of what was a very rich and lively discussion that followed between Fran and Sansara and the audience. The full program will soon be available at revolutionbooksnyc.org.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that we should live in a society where abortion is treated just like any other form of healthcare. And I very much agree. But I think we have to, and I think you do, but I don't think most people do, we have to recognize why abortion is singled out. Why have 11 abortion providers been assassinated? Why have clinics been bombed? Why is there pervasive violence and threat? Why have all these, as you were saying, trap laws been passed to shut down clinics based on really things that have no medical benefit to women, to the patients, but are just about shutting down clinics based on technicalities? Why is this targeting abortion in a way that doesn't happen to heart surgeons or people who psychologists, or what I mean? Why is it singled out?
Not because it's healthcare. That's not the reason it's being attacked, right? Yeah,
exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, not because it's healthcare, but because it speaks to the very place that has been given to women in society. That's basically what it speaks to. It speaks to, can women really be free people with full rights in a society with male supremacy that is exacerbated by capitalism? What is the place? I mean, we see this on so many fronts. We see this in the resistance to any form of childcare, for instance. All these things that give women autonomy okay, that make it possible for a woman to have a family should she wish, and also work outside of the home. All of these things there is enormous resistance to. So that does speak to that, whatever you want. It's a Christian vision, but it's also a part of every religious orthodoxy, and certainly state religions, to have women have a certain place, creating babies for armies, for the army, for the factory, what have you, to serve and to in turn be oppressed. I mean, women getting out of that role scares the shit out of them, and that is really what we're fighting about here.
And I go to school in New York. I go to a historically women's school called Barnard College. I've kind of always thought about this and wondered about this, and it's funny and kind of hypocritical, because I'm studying political science, but I want to be a lawyer, different kind of law, not politician. But I am curious what you think about government and working in government. I always said that I wanted to be a politician, but then kind of seeing the way that politics works in this country, you have to compromise. You could go in as a radical and you can't really get exactly where you want to get if, not that you can't have those beliefs, but there's kind of a midpoint that it always gets to. And while I do think that it will kind of always be like that and the system will always be like that, I also wonder what kind of changes could happen with my generation in terms of pushing more progressive representatives into the House and the Senate. And so I'm just kind of wondering, in general, I know you talked about how we should stray away and work more as people, but both obviously could be helpful as well, or maybe not, or I don't really know. That's my question.
Fran, do you want to go first?
If you ever did get into government, you could at least try to be honest. I think that's really important. I went to the swearing in of Deborah Glick, who's a state senator, I think. No, she's not a senator. She's an assembly person who I knew previously. And not only did she take her vow on the women's Bible with her female partner, but what she said to the audience was, "I am only as good as you are out there in the street." I need you out there in the street if I'm going to do anything. So I have a mass in back of me. So if we want to talk about interactions with politicians, that would be one of the best kinds. And that would be the kind of politician to be. Now I followed her, and she of course had to make her own compromises. You're very right about that system. Nevertheless, that works to put some fire into their asses if we're out there.
Well, I would go back to, I think in the question and where Fran ended, it was important to recognize that when you go into the political structures of this system, I thought the audience member had it correctly. You might still feel and believe certain things, but you can't act on them. You are forced to compromise with the dynamics of this system. And I'll go back to the analogy that I gave in my presentation. And it's an analogy that Bob Avakian used in the interviews that I did with him, which is a very useful and accurate. It's a very scientific. Every analogy has limitations, but it captures something very important. We live in a society, imagine it's like a house, and the laws and the culture are the rooms we live in. They're what govern our lives day to day. But underneath that house is a foundation. And that foundation sets the terms for what happens in that house. It sets the terms for what the politicians can and cannot do. In another presentation, Bob Avakian gives the example how, because the foundation of the house is capitalism, imperialism. It's a global system of exploitation. It's a system that has many forms of social oppression woven into and reinforced and fueled and driven forward by that mode of production of exploitation. The oppression of women is woven into that. The white supremacy is woven into that, and it plays out in the culture and the laws and how we live our lives. But he gives an example of how under this system you could never have the right to eat. You literally, what could be more essential to human survival and sustenance than the right to eat? And yet we don't have that right to eat. I was just doing research on this. 1 in 8 children in the U.S. goes hungry, and that's in the U.S. 1 in 5 Black children, because it's much higher rate for Black children, go hungry. And then you look around the world, 10,000 children die every single day from hunger or related issues on this planet. And yet there's food for people. But you can't pass a law that says everybody has the right to eat, because once you do that, if people had the food, then you could take it from the grocery store. How do they restock it if they're not given money for it? They have to restock. They have to pay for the shipping, for the produce that they get. It's a system. It's a global system. You want a different system. You want different laws and culture that are really on the side of the people. You need a different system. So I would say, no, don't lend your heart and your desire for change to being a functionary of a system that can only work one way. Yes, you can stretch it this way or that way, but fundamentally, it's still going to be an oppressive system. Lift your sights. Become part of fighting for a different system. Be a representative, a people's representative in the new Socialist Republic of North America, the system that we would implement after a revolution. This is a very visionary document that Bob Avakian wrote. It's part of what makes him the most important political thinker and leader in the world today. He's actually done the work to say how we could live differently, a different economy, a different education system, different social relations, and that back people up, don't force you to compromise, but actually enable you and unleash that desire for radical change, and including all the way through the fight to break thousands of years of traditional chains of patriarchy and shame and stigma on women and differently gendered people is a driving force in ensuring this society goes forward to the emancipation of humanity. Become part of this. Lift your sights and fight like hell out in the streets against what's being done to women and others right now as you learn about it. Don't let this continue, and don't lower your sights, and just work within what this system tells you is possible.
In closing, we want to leave you with this powerful clip from the Bob Avakian interviews that was part of this program at Revolution Books.
I will say, just on a personal note, that for me, in my own development as a revolutionary and communist, I would say it has been a lifelong process of a continually deepening understanding of the horrific nature of the oppression of women, but also the pivotal and central role of the struggle for the emancipation of women in the overall communist revolution to emancipate all humanity from every form of oppression and exploitation. So, this really is, crucial in the whole struggle. There is not going to be any liberating struggle, any liberating real revolution that doesn't have right at the heart of it, at the core of it, the emancipation of women from every way in which they're degraded and debased and oppressed and, violently suppressed. And, this is a lot of struggle. Now, look, I talked about backward shit that people are into, but there also are, positive things where, not only among young women, but even some of the young men, including among the oppressed, have taken a better stand on this because they can identify, at least on as a first step, beginning basis, they can identify with people who are being oppressed. And then sometimes it's there's more largeness of mind involved. They don't want oppression of any kind, as much as they understand that. They're against it. So there's contention out there. But, in order, like I said, in order to have this revolution, this has to be at the core of it. It's not the only form of oppression. It has to be uprooted, obviously, but it is right at the core of transforming the whole world. This historic and, thousands of year old oppression of women in different forms in different societies, and it's been completely bound up with the division of society overall into masters and slaves, into oppressors and oppressors, exploiters and exploiters. You go back in history, it's completely bound up with that and has run through every form of oppression and exploitation, going back to days of slavery right up to the modern capitalism, imperialism, and all its forms of oppression.